We all know what your astrological sign is based on your birthday. But did you know that there's an astronomical sign that you probably didn't know about? And it turns out that it's not the same thing. So today we're going to set the record straight. It's me, and you're watching this channel, and this is a Duel of Concepts deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about the difference between astrological signs and astronomical signs. Let us know in the comments which one you identify with most, or if you don't identify with either. Make sure to like this video, subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. So when you hear people talk about star signs, they're usually referring to your astrological sign, which is determined by the date of your birth, and has nothing really to do with stars at all. It's based on constellations that the sun appears to pass throughout the year, which we call the Zodiac. Now these signs are based on a system developed thousands of years ago, and they've remained the same ever since. So if you were born on February, you're an Aquarius. If you were born on March, you're a Pisces. But there's no actual physical relationship here. Like the sun doesn't actually go through these constellations. That's just how we decided to interpret the positions of these constellations relative to the sun. And it turns out that because of a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes, those dates are actually wrong. So what does astronomy say about your sign? Well, first, let's get some definitions straight. We'll start with the astronomical definition. There are 88 official constellations defined by the International Astronomical Union. They range in size from the huge constellation Taurus, which contains the Hyades, Pleiades, and Orion, and covers almost 800 square degrees of the sky, to the tiny constellation Crux, which only covers 0.0 to 3 degrees and is barely visible outside of the southern hemisphere. But for the purpose of signs, we're only concerned with the 12 constellations of the Zodiac. Those are the constellations that lie along the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun. Now remember that the constellations themselves aren't actually moving. They're just our way of naming certain patterns of stars. The sun is what's moving. As the Earth orbits the sun appears to move against the backdrop of the fixed stars. When the sun appears to cross into a particular constellation, we say that we have entered that constellation, or that the sun is in that constellation. And that's how we define the start and end dates of each sign. For example, the sun enters Aries on March, which means that March is the start of the astrological new year. That's also why we say that someone was born under the sign of Aries. If they were born in March or April, and then the sun moves into Taurus, then Gemini, and so on. But here's the problem. The Earth's orbit isn't perfectly circular, and the Earth's axis isn't perfectly perpendicular to the sun, because of these two factors. Sometimes, the sun lines up with a constellation earlier in the year, and sometimes it lines up with a constellation later in the year. So the starting and ending dates of each sign change slightly every year. The other issue is that the Earth's axis wobbles as it spins on its axis. It's a slow wobble, but over time it changes which constellations the sun lines up with. This is known as the precession of the equinoxes, and it takes roughly 26,000 years to complete one full cycle. At the beginning of this cycle, the vernal equinox, which is the point at which the sun enters Aries, lined up with the constellation Aries. But now, 2,600 years later, the vernal equinox lines up with the constellation Pisces. This means that, according to astronomy, we should be entering Pisces in March rather than Aries. And in another 2,600 years, the vernal equinox will line up with Aquarius. But if you look at the calendar, none of that makes any sense. We still say that March is Aries, April is Taurus, and so on. Why? Well, the answer is tradition. The astrological system that we use defines the start and end dates of the signs based on Babylonian records from nearly 4,000 years ago. Since then, the precession of the equinoxes has shifted the start dates backwards about 3 months. So by astronomical reckoning, I'm a Pisces. But by astrological reckoning, I'm an Aquarius. However, there is one more thing that we need to consider. You see, we tend to think of the constellations as being static, unmoving figures on the celestial sphere. But as I mentioned before, the Earth's axis is wobbling. And over the course of 26,000 years, this wobble causes the entire set of constellations to move backwards by a whole year. This means that in another 26,000 years, the vernal equinox will line up with Aquarius. That would mean that the astrological and astronomical signs would align once again. In a few thousand years, though, we won't be around to care about such trivial things as signs. Unless, of course, the sun decides to wipe out all life on Earth. In which case, who knows what kind of wacky system the survivors will come up with to predict human behavior based on their birthdays. And speaking of signs, The fact that we have different astrological and astronomical signs has led to some confusion in popular culture, specifically surrounding a constellation called Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus, which translates to snake bearer, is a constellation located between Scorpio and Sagittarius. It was recognized by the Babylonians, but it never really caught on in Western astrology. It wasn't until the 1700s that German astronomer Bode suggested adding Ophiuchus as a 13th sign. He picked October as its month. Some astrologers even started making horoscopes for Ophiuchus. But there was one problem. By including Ophiuchus, the precession of the equinoxes caused all of the other signs to shift by a few weeks. This threw off the established astrological order. So while Ophiuchus may make a good 13th sign, it simply couldn't fit into the existing framework without causing more problems than it solved. And that's why we stuck with 12 signs. However, the inclusion of Ophiuchus is much more significant in Indian astrology, where it's considered the 13th or sometimes the 23rd sign. That's because Indian astrology uses a tropical zodiac system, which is similar to the tropical zodiac used in the West, but there are some important differences. The tropical zodiac system divides the ecliptic into 27 divisions, which are basically similar to signs, but each nakshatra is associated with a particular constellation, and instead of using the vernal equinox as a starting point, the tropical zodiac starts with the constellation Ash, which is the first of 27 lunar. So in Indian astrology, there are no months assigned to the signs, and the precession of the equinoxes has much less of an impact. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about the tropical zodiac, let us know in the comments and we can cover it in a future episode. So what's the bottom line here? Should you call yourself an astrological Aquarius, an astronomical Aquarius, or maybe an astrological Pisces? Well, in truth, the question of whether or not the two systems should align isn't really up to us. Astrology and astronomy are fundamentally different systems. Astronomy is a science. It deals with observable reality and follows the scientific method. Astronomy can tell us which constellations line up with the sun on which days of the year, but it can't tell us anything about the personality traits of people born during those times. Astrology, on the other hand, is a belief system. It is a way of understanding human behavior based on the positions of the constellations at the time of a person's birth. Astrology can assign personality traits to people born under particular constellations, but it can't tell us which constellations line up with the sun on which days of the year. And yet, despite their differences, astrology and astronomy have a lot more in common than meets the eye. Both are concerned with the positions of the constellations. Both originated from a desire to understand our place in the universe, and both have been used throughout history to predict future events. The two systems diverged long ago, but perhaps one day they'll find a way to come together. Hey, thanks for watching. So here's another episode you can watch next. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.